The day a little girl sold the last thing she loved. She had no idea she was about to change 3 lives forever. I was sitting inside my black Bentley on a cold Thursday afternoon when I saw her. At first, she looked like any other kid walking down a busy Queens sidewalk. Small backpack, worn sneakers, blonde hair tied into a messy ponytail. 8 years old, maybe 9. But there was something about the way she held that bicycle. The way her fingers lingered on the handlebars every few steps, as if she was saying goodbye. The bike wasn't expensive. Pink paint faded by years of use. Stickers peeling from a frame. One training wheel long gone. The kind of bicycle parents buy after saving for months. The kind children remember for the rest of their lives. My driver was waiting at a red light when I watched the little girl stop in front of a pawn shop. She stood there for several seconds without moving, looking up at the sign, looking back down at her bicycle. Then she took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Something made me pay attention. Maybe it was the hesitation. Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes. Or maybe it was because I hadn't seen a child look that serious in a very long time. 5 minutes later, she came back out. No bicycle, just a small envelope clutched tightly against her chest. She looked down inside it before counting the bills. Once, twice. Then she smiled. Not the smile of a child getting something she wanted. The smile of someone relieved they could finally solve a problem. That smile bothered me more than it should have. The light turned green. We started moving, but I couldn't stop watching her through the tinted window. She crossed the street and entered a grocery store. A few minutes later, she emerged carrying 2 paper bags that looked far too heavy for her small arms. Milk, bread, peanut butter, canned soup, a box of cereal balanced dangerously near the top. The entire purchase probably cost less than $50. Yet she held those bags like treasure, as if they mattered more than anything else in the world. Follow her, I heard myself say. My driver glanced into the rearview mirror. Sir, just follow her. He nodded. The little girl walked nearly 6 blocks, past apartment buildings with cracked brick walls, past laundromats and discount stores, past people too busy surviving to notice anyone else. Eventually, she stopped in front of an aging apartment complex. The kind landlord stopped investing in years ago. She struggled to pull open the entrance door while balancing the groceries. One of the bags tipped sideways. A photograph slipped out and floated onto the sidewalk. She didn't notice. By the time she disappeared inside, I was already stepping out of the car. The photo lay face up near the curb. Rain from a morning storm had dampened one corner. I bent down and picked it up. A little girl, the same one, sitting on someone's shoulders, smiling, laughing, happy. The man holding her looked familiar, so familiar that my pulse stopped for half a second. I stared at the photograph, then stared harder. No, it couldn't be. 12 years had passed. 12 years since I'd seen that face. 12 years since I buried certain memories so deep I convinced myself they no longer existed. Yet there he was, smiling directly at the camera. The man I thought had betrayed me. The man I believed was long gone. My fingers tightened around the photograph as a cold feeling settled into my chest. Because if that little girl belonged to him, then nothing I thought I knew about the past was true. I did not go home that night. The photograph sat on the desk in my study while Manhattan's skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. I must have looked at it 100 times. The little girl was real. The smile was real. And the man carrying her on his shoulders was definitely Ethan Carter. 12 years ago, Ethan had been one of the few people I trusted. He was smart, honest, and stubborn enough to tell me when I was wrong. Then one day he vanished. No explanation. No would-be. Only rumors. Rumors that he had betrayed people. Rumors that he had taken money and disappeared. Rumors I had eventually accepted because they were easier than asking questions nobody could answer. Yet now I was staring at a photograph that made those old stories feel hollow. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel, the head of my security team. You asked for information on the girl. Tell me. Papers shuffled on the other end. Her name is Lily Dawson. 8 years old. Lives with her mother, Claire Dawson. Same apartment for the last 3 years. Dawson, not Carter. I leaned back in my chair. What about the father? Silence stretched for a second. Ethan Carter. Died 9 years ago. I closed my eyes. 9 years. Long enough for a child to barely remember her father. Long enough for a widow to learn how to survive without him. Keep talking. Daniel cleared his throat. Claire works 2 jobs. Morning shift at a diner. Evening bookkeeping for a local hardware supplier. No criminal record. No debt beyond normal bills. No complaints from neighbors. Everyone says the same thing, which is, she works too hard. I stared at the city lights below. Something about that answer hit harder than it should have. Most people talked about money, success, status. Nobody described someone by how hard they worked unless they had watched them struggle. And the apartment? I asked. 2 months behind on rent. My jaw tightened. What happened to Ethan's assets? Another pause. That is where things get strange. Daniel sounded cautious now. According to old records, Ethan owned part of a construction company before he died. Not a huge company, but successful. There should have been insurance money, property, savings, and none of it reached Claire. I looked down at the photograph again. Lily's smile suddenly felt heavier. Find out where it went. Already working on it. After the call ended, I remained alone in the quiet room. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere across the city, a little girl was probably asleep after giving away the thing she loved most. Somewhere, her mother was probably calculating bills she could not afford. And somewhere between those 2 realities was a story nobody had told me yet. The next afternoon, I parked across from the diner where Claire worked. The lunch crowd filled the booths. Through the window, I saw her for the first time. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Simple blue uniform. No jewelry except a wedding band hanging from a thin silver chain around her neck. She moved quickly from table to table carrying coffee pots and plates. Tired, focused, determined. Then a customer handed her a $20 tip. For the first time all day, she smiled. The same smile Lily had worn outside the grocery store. Small, grateful, earned. And in that moment, I realized something that unsettled me more than the photograph ever could. Ethan Carter had not left behind a broken family. He had left behind 2 people who were still fighting every single day, which meant somebody else had taken everything from them. And I intended to find out who. The next week passed without Claire Dawson ever noticing the black car that occasionally appeared across the street. That was intentional. I had no interest in disrupting her life. Not yet. I wanted answers first. Real answers. Every report Daniel delivered only created more questions. Ethan Carter's company had been thriving before his death. Financial statements showed growth. Contracts, assets, future projects already lined up. Then suddenly, within months of his passing, everything had changed. Ownership shifted. Accounts were emptied. Properties were transferred. Signatures appeared on documents that nobody could fully verify. Every trail seemed to lead toward one name. Richard Dawson, Claire's brother-in-law. The man who had stepped forward after Ethan died and claimed he was helping the family. Yet the numbers told a different story. One rainy evening, I received another call from Daniel. We found something. I was standing beside the window of my office, watching the storm roll across the city. Tell me, Richard now owns 3 commercial properties that originally belonged to Ethan's company. My grip tightened around the phone. How did he acquire them? That is the interesting part. The transfer happened 6 months after Ethan died. Claire's name appears nowhere in the transaction. Silence settled between us. Outside, headlights reflected across wet pavement. Was she supposed to inherit part of it? I asked. Based on the original company structure, yes. I exhaled slowly. The answer was exactly what I expected and somehow worse than I imagined. Keep digging. The next afternoon, I returned to the diner. Not because I needed coffee. Not because I had business nearby. I told myself it was to observe, to understand the people connected to Ethan. But the truth was simpler. I wanted to see whether Claire looked anything like the woman Ethan used to describe whenever he talked about his family. She was working the counter when I walked in. The lunch rush had just ended. A few customers lingered over pie and coffee while an old country song played softly from a radio near the kitchen. Claire looked exhausted. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. Yet she still smiled at every customer, still remembered names, Still asked about grandchildren and doctor's appointments and high school football games. The entire place seemed brighter because she was there. I chose a booth near the back. She approached with a coffee pot in hand. "Can I get you something?" she asked. It was the first time she had ever spoken directly to me. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who spent her life taking care of others. I glanced up. For a moment, I forgot my prepared answer. Ethan had once told me that Claire could make strangers feel welcome within 30 seconds. He had been right. "Just coffee," I said. She nodded and poured it. "Long day?" she asked politely. I almost laughed. If only she knew. Something like that. A small smile touched her face. "Well, hopefully it gets better." Then she moved on to the next table. Such a simple conversation. Less than 15 seconds. Yet as I watched her walk away, I understood something important. Claire Dawson had no idea what had been taken from her. She believed life had simply been unfair. She believed she had lost everything because that was how the world worked. And that realization bothered me more than any financial report ever could. Because while she was working double shifts to keep the lights on, someone else was living comfortably off the future that should have belonged to her and Lily. And for the first time in 12 years, I found myself thinking about Ethan not as a memory, but as a promise I had failed to keep. 3 days later, the first Real crack appeared. Daniel arrived at my office carrying a thick folder and an expression I had learned to respect. He only looked that serious when something mattered. The city stretched beyond the glass behind him, silver beneath a cloudy afternoon sky. He placed the folder on my desk without speaking. "You found something." He nodded. "More than something." I opened the file. Property transfers, insurance documents, corporate records, pages and pages of transactions. At first glance, everything appeared legal, organized, professional. But the deeper I looked, the more the details stopped making sense. Dates overlapped. Signatures changed styles. Witnesses appeared on paperwork despite being hundreds of miles away at the time. One document led to another until a clear pattern emerged. Richard Dawson had not simply inherited responsibility after Ethan's death. He had quietly positioned himself between Claire and everything Ethan left behind. I stared at the numbers. Company shares, insurance payouts, real estate holdings, retirement accounts. By conservative estimates, Claire should have received enough financial security to raise Lily comfortably for years. Instead, she was working double shifts at a diner. Instead, an 8-year-old child had sold her bicycle for groceries. A cold feeling settled into my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something heavier. Disappointment. Ethan had trusted people. He always believed family would do the right thing. Looking at those papers, I wondered how many times that trust had been rewarded with betrayal. "There is more," Daniel said quietly. He handed me another document. It was a copy of a letter, 8 years old, sent by Claire to Richard shortly after Ethan's death. The words were simple. She thanked him for helping her understand the legal process. Thanked him for guiding her through difficult decisions. Thanked him for protecting Ethan's legacy. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Every sentence carried complete trust, complete faith. She had believed he was helping her. My jaw tightened. She never knew. "No," Daniel replied. "She never knew." That evening I found myself driving through Queens again. Rain had stopped, but the sidewalk still glistened beneath streetlights. The diner was closed. Through the apartment window above a small corner bakery, I spotted warm yellow light. Claire's apartment. I remained across the street inside the car. Not watching for information this time. Watching because I could not stop thinking about that letter. A shadow crossed the curtain. Then another. Lily appeared near the window, holding a sheet of paper, excitedly showing something to her mother. Claire knelt beside her. They laughed. The sound could not reach me through the glass, yet I could see it, feel it. For a moment the apartment looked rich, not because of money, because of love. Then Lily pointed toward the empty space beside the building where her bicycle used to be. The smile on her face faded slightly. Claire pulled her into a hug. Even from across the street, I could recognize the expression on Claire's face. The expression every parent wears when they wish they could give their child more than life has allowed. I looked away. Because in that moment, I finally understood the real cost of what had happened. It was never about missing money. It was about years. Years of struggle that never should have existed. Years that had been stolen from two people who deserved better. And for the first time since this began, I stopped asking whether Richard Dawson was responsible. I started asking how long he had been getting away with it. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through a meeting when Daniel walked in without knocking. He never interrupted meetings. Never. The expression on his face told me everything before he spoke. We found the witness. The room immediately fell silent. I stood and followed him into my office. The door closed behind us. Daniel placed a small recorder on my desk. Former accountant. Worked for Ethan's company before and after his death. Retired to Florida 6 years ago. My pulse quickened. What did he say? Daniel pressed play. An elderly voice filled the room. Nervous. Careful. The man explained that shortly after Ethan died, Richard took control of company operations. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then documents started appearing that nobody had seen before. Ownership agreements, transfer requests, new financial authorizations. Employees questioned them privately, but nobody wanted to challenge a grieving family member stepping into a leadership role. Months passed. One decision became 10. 10 became 50. Eventually, the company no longer belonged to the people Ethan had trusted. It belonged to Richard. The recording ended. I stared at the device for several seconds. Can he prove it? Daniel nodded. He kept copies. For the first time since this investigation began, I felt the pieces locking together. Not assumptions, not suspicions. Evidence. Real evidence. Later that afternoon, another report arrived. This one focused on Richard's current lifestyle. Expensive vacations, luxury véhicules, investment properties, private club memberships. The numbers were staggering. What bothered me was not the wealth itself. It was the timeline. Everything accelerated immediately after Ethan's death. Every major purchase, every business expansion, every new asset. The pattern was impossible to ignore. While Richard's world grew larger, Claire's world had become smaller and smaller until it fit inside a modest apartment and 2 exhausting jobs. That evening, I found myself parked outside the apartment building again. I told myself I was reviewing information, thinking, planning. The truth was that I could not stop comparing 2 completely different lives. Through the window, I saw Lily sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Claire sat beside her balancing a stack of bills. A calculator rested near her elbow. She paused occasionally to help Lily with a spelling assignment. Then she returned to the numbers. Back and forth. Mother, provider, teacher, problem solver. She carried every burden without complaint. Suddenly, Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Claire opened it, read it, then smiled. A real smile. Lily had received an A on a school project. The little girl practically bounced in her chair with excitement. Claire applauded dramatically, making Lily laugh so hard she nearly fell out of her seat. I caught myself smiling too. Then the smile faded, because the contrast felt impossible to ignore. They still found reasons to celebrate, still found joy, even after everything they had lost. Most people would have become bitter. Somehow they had not. My phone buzzed. Another message from Daniel. A single sentence appeared on the screen. Richard is meeting with attorneys tomorrow regarding property transfers. I looked up toward the apartment window one last time. Claire was helping Lily hang the school paper on the refrigerator. A simple moment. A happy moment. The kind that should never have been threatened in the first place. And as I watched them, I realized the investigation was no longer about discovering what happened. Now it was about making sure the truth finally reached the people who deserved it most. 2 days later, I learned something that stayed with me long after the reports were closed and the meetings ended. Lily's birthday was coming. Daniel mentioned it casually while reviewing schedules. She turns 9 on Saturday. 9. Such a simple number. Yet something about it lingered in my mind. That evening, as the city settled beneath a blanket of orange streetlights and distant traffic, I found myself driving through Queens again. The apartment window glowed softly against the darkening sky. I should have been elsewhere. There were contracts waiting for signatures, investors expecting answers, a dozen responsibilities demanding my attention. Instead, I sat across the street watching a family that had no idea I existed. Through the window, I could see Lily at the kitchen table surrounded by crayons and construction paper. She was carefully cutting stars from yellow cardstock while Claire prepared dinner. The apartment looked small from the outside, smaller than it should have for two people carrying so much weight. Yet somehow it still felt warm, still felt like home. I watched Claire place 2 bowls on the table. Simple food, nothing extravagant. Then Lily held up one of the paper stars and pointed excitedly toward the refrigerator. Claire laughed and helped tape it beside an older collection of school drawings and report cards. Every available inch of that refrigerator door seemed dedicated to Lily's achievements. It struck me how different that was from the homes of wealthy people I knew. Expensive artwork, imported decorations, designer furniture. Yet none of those things ever carried as much meaning as a child's drawing hung with pride. My phone vibrated. A new message from Daniel. We confirmed the property records. Multiple transfers originated through Richard's legal team. Evidence continues to build. I read the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket. For once, I was not thinking about evidence. I was thinking about birthdays. About how many birthdays Lily had celebrated without the father whose smile still looked back at me from that photograph. About how many times Claire had stretched a budget that should never have been stretched. About how many sacrifices happened quietly behind those apartment walls. Then something unexpected happened. The kitchen light flickered. Once. Twice. Then half the apartment went dark. Lily froze. Claire looked up immediately. Even from across the street, I recognized the expression. Concern. Calculation. The kind that appears when every unexpected expense feels dangerous. Claire disappeared into another room and returned carrying a flashlight. She forced a smile for Lily and made a game out of it. Within minutes, they were sitting together beneath the flashlight beam, pretending it was an adventure. Lily giggled. Claire smiled, but I could see the exhaustion hiding behind her eyes. She was making the best of a problem she should not have been facing. And suddenly the investigation became painfully real again. Not numbers, not legal documents, not property transfers. A mother sitting in a partially dark apartment trying to protect her daughter from worrying. A little girl laughing because she trusted her mother to make everything okay. I stayed there longer than I intended. Long enough to watch them finish dinner by flashlight. Long enough to see Lily yawn and rest her head on Claire's shoulder. Long enough to realize that every new discovery made one truth impossible to ignore. Someone had stolen far more than money from them. They had stolen years of peace. And I was beginning to suspect that Saturday's birthday would change everything. Saturday arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp spring air that made New York feel almost gentle. I woke before sunrise, unable to shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Across the city, Lily Dawson was turning 9 years old. Daniel's latest reports sat untouched on my desk. For once, I was not interested in documents. I was interested in people. Around noon, I parked a block away from the apartment building. The neighborhood was quiet. Children played basketball near a cracked court. Music drifted from an open window somewhere above the street. Life moved forward the way it always did. Ordinary, unaware. Through the apartment window, I could see homemade decorations taped to the walls. Paper stars, handwritten signs, colorful streamers that looked like they came from a discount store. Nothing expensive, nothing elaborate. Yet every decoration had clearly been placed with care. Lily darted from room to room, wearing a bright smile. Claire followed behind, carrying a small cake. It was not a large cake, just enough for 2 people. But when Lily saw it, her face lit up like Christmas morning. I watched as Claire placed 9 candles on top. Then she stepped back and admired it as if it were the finest cake in Manhattan. My chest tightened unexpectedly, because I knew how much effort that simple celebration had probably required. Every dollar mattered in that apartment. Every expense demanded sacrifice. Yet Claire had found a way to make the day special anyway. My phone buzzed. Daniel, we have confirmation, he said immediately. The attorney reviewed everything. The evidence is stronger than we expected. I leaned back in my seat. How strong? Strong enough that Richard's legal team has started asking questions. They know something is coming. Across the street, Lily was laughing as Claire handed her a wrapped gift. The package was small. Judging by Lily's reaction, it did not matter. She hugged her mother so tightly that Claire nearly lost her balance. Good, I said quietly. Keep moving forward. After the call ended, I remained there watching. Then something happened that I would remember for a long time. Lily disappeared into her bedroom and returned carrying a photograph frame. She placed it carefully in the center of the table beside the birthday cake. Even from across the street, I recognized the image. Ethan. Claire rested her hand gently against the frame. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily smiled toward the photograph before blowing out the candles. My throat felt strangely tight. Ethan should have been there. He should have seen his daughter turning 9. He should have watched her grow. Instead, all they had left were memories and unanswered questions. As the afternoon sunlight filled the apartment, I made a decision. The investigation had already uncovered the truth. The evidence was already forming a complete picture. What remained was timing. And after watching that birthday celebration, I no longer wanted to move carefully. I wanted to move quickly. Because every additional day that Claire spent believing she had simply been unlucky felt unacceptable. Every additional day that Lily grew up without knowing the truth felt wrong. For the first time since finding that photograph on the sidewalk, I could finally see the end of the road ahead. And somewhere beyond, it waited a conversation that would change all of our lives. Monday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Manhattan. By noon, Claire Dawson's life began to change without her realizing it. She was halfway through a shift at the diner when her manager approached with a puzzled expression. "There's a gentleman here asking for you." Claire glanced toward the front of the restaurant and immediately looked confused. I was standing near the entrance in a dark suit, completely out of place among the coffee cups and lunch specials. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she walked over and folded her arms cautiously. "Have we met?" she asked. Up close, the exhaustion I had noticed from a distance was even more obvious. Long hours, too much responsibility, not enough rest. Yet there was strength in her eyes, the kind Ethan used to talk about. "No," I said, "but I knew your husband." The words changed everything. Her expression froze. The noise of the diner seemed to disappear around us. "Ethan," she whispered. I nodded. "Can we talk?" 20 minutes later, we sat in a quiet office above the restaurant. Rain tapped softly against the window. Claire held a cup of coffee she no longer seemed aware of. "Ethan never mentioned you," she said carefully. "I know." I placed a folder on the table between us. "There are things you need to see." For the next hour, she read documents. Property records, financial statements, legal filings, evidence collected over weeks of investigation. I watched disbelief slowly give way to confusion. Confusion gave way to shock. Several times, she stopped reading altogether and simply stared at the pages. "This cannot be right," she whispered. "It is." Her eyes moved to another document, then another. "You're saying Ethan left all of this?" "Yes." Her hand trembled slightly as she turned another page. "And you are saying it never reached us?" I nodded. Silence filled the room. Heavy, unavoidable. Claire looked out the window for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded distant. "For years I thought I had failed him." The words landed harder than any accusation. "I thought I made bad decisions. I thought I lost everything he worked for." I leaned forward. "You did not lose it." Her eyes filled with emotion she had probably carried for nearly a decade. "Then why?" she asked quietly. "Why did nobody tell me?" I had no answer that would make those years disappear. No answer that could return birthdays, missed opportunities, or nights spent worrying about bills. The only thing I could offer was the truth. Claire closed the folder and pressed her palm against the cover. For several seconds, she stared at Ethan's name printed across one of the documents. Then she smiled through tears. A small smile. A painful smile, but a smile nonetheless. "He did not leave us with nothing," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "He never did." As we left the office, neither of us noticed that life outside continued as normal. Cars moved through the rain. People hurried down sidewalks. The city remained unchanged. Yet everything had changed, because after 9 long years, Claire Dawson finally knew that her husband had kept his promises. And somewhere across town, another man was about to learn that secrets do not stay hidden forever. The following Friday began like any other. Claire left for work before sunrise. Lily headed to school carrying a backpack that looked almost as big as she was. The city moved through its usual rhythm, unaware that years of unanswered questions were finally reaching their conclusion. I stood in my office overlooking Manhattan as Daniel reviewed the final updates. Every document had been verified. Every financial trail had been traced. Every missing piece now fit together. The truth no longer lived in rumors or suspicions. It lived in facts, and facts had a way of changing everything. That afternoon, Claire received a call from the attorney handling her case. Then another. Then another. By evening, the impossible had become real. Assets that should have belonged to Ethan's family were finally being restored through proper legal channels. Accounts were being reviewed. Ownership records were being corrected. Years of confusion were giving way to clarity. Yet none of that was the moment I remember most. The moment I remember happened the next morning. I drove to Queens one final time. The apartment building looked exactly the same. Same sidewalk, same brick walls, same neighborhood. But waiting in front of the building was something new. A bicycle, not extravagant, not covered in ribbons. Just a beautiful blue bicycle with a small silver bell on the handlebars. Beside it sat a white envelope. From across the street, I watched the apartment door open. Lily stepped outside first. She froze, completely froze. Her eyes locked onto the bicycle. For several seconds, she did not move. Then she looked back toward her mother as if she thought she was dreaming. Claire stared too, confused, emotional, speechless. Lily approached slowly. Her fingers brushed the handlebars. Then she noticed the envelope. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note. Your father once helped someone when he did not have to. Years later, his kindness found its way back home. Never stop believing that good people matter. Lily read the note twice, then looked toward her mother. Claire's eyes, filled with tears, not tears of sadness, tears of relief, of healing, of finally understanding that the world had not completely forgotten them. Lily wrapped her arms around Claire and held on tightly. I looked away for a moment, giving them that privacy even though they would never know I was there. Some moments belong only to the people living them. As I returned to the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire, the first she had ever sent me. Thank you for giving my daughter part of her childhood back. I stared at the screen for several seconds before typing a reply. Ethan did that, not me. Then I put the phone away and watched the city pass beyond the window as we drove home. For years, I believed loyalty was measured by business deals, promises, and obligations. Ethan taught me something different without ever knowing it. A little girl sold the thing she loved most because her mother needed help. She thought she was solving one small problem. She never realized she was uncovering a truth powerful enough to change the future. Sometimes the people who save us are not the strongest. Sometimes they're simply the ones who refuse to stop loving when life gives them every reason to quit.